This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hello and welcome to Haway The Podcast. It's Martin here and you're joining us for another episode of On This Week, where we take a journey back through some of the ups and downs that occurred on this week in the history of Sunderland AFC. And as usual, I've got my 2 very reliable sources of Sunderland memories and information waiting to impart all of their knowledge and research that they've been doing feverishly over the weekend. So first of all, we'll say good morning to Andrew. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, good morning. Yes, ready to go. And as you say, I've been feverishly working away in the background there, looking at a couple of these stories.
Very good. No, there's lots and lots to pack into this week. And of course, because we're coming to the end of February, we've got the leap year to contend with as well. So it's only once every 4 years, but we've got February the 29th. So this week's a little bit longer than usual. And that's, so if you're going for a long drive or going for a long run, you might need to do a little bit more to fit all of this week's episode in. Because to help us go through all of the stuff we've got to go through is Kelvin Beattie as well. Hello, Kelvin.
Hi, morning lads and morning listeners. You've just made me think about the 29th there. I was always terribly busy on the 29th fending off wedding proposals from ladies.
Look, it was only once every 4 years, eh? Now, last week I set you a question to ponder on, and this was it. On February the 25th, 1989, Sunderland beat Hull City 2-0 at Roker Park, but which former Sunderland player was sent off for Hull City? Do either of you two gents remember that game, or can you remember the player who saw red for Hull?
Was it Billy Whitehurst?
It was big Billy Whitehurst. And he was a player who just signed from Reading, I think, earlier that season. And he'd only played 3 months for us. And I actually really liked him as a player. I thought he was a really... He's one of those players who you really like to have on your side and didn't like to play against. I think he's all elbows and physicality, wasn't he? But he could score a good goal or two. But no, he got frustrated. I think he took out John McPhail for the red card that he got late on. But Andrew, it was also Thomas Howser's debut, I think I'm correct in saying.
Yes, yeah. You said there, do either of us remember this game? And I thought, well, I better remember it because I was reading about it last night before before speaking to you both. As you quite rightly say, Martin, I mean, it was perhaps inevitable that Billy Whitehurst was going to get sent off in the game. He'd come to Sunderland, only been here a short period of time, and then was moved on by Dennis Smith as part of the exchange deal that got Tony Norman into the club. Tony Norman was like a record buy for us at the time. And if you remember, he didn't actually want Whitehurst to go. He thought he was doing good stuff for us. He was doing well in a Sunderland shirt, but it was a case of he was that keen to get Norman in, he had to sacrifice Whitehurst alongside Ian Hesford, who was the other player involved in that cash plus player exchange. So it was a bit of a shame that Whitehurst went. Smith was ever so torn about it. I don't think the doorman of Sunderland Town Centre were too upset to see Whitehurst go. Bless him. Because he was quite the boy on a night out by all accounts. But yeah, he's sent away and then he's back on Wearside for a very quick return. You can see straight away that he's up for it. He gets spoken to by the ref in the first few minutes for going in late and high on Gordon Armstrong. So, I mean, he's done well to get away with just a speaking to. He's clearly up for it. Half-time, it's goalless, but it's not a bad game, in all honesty. It's after the break where all these things kick off and Thomas Hauser gets to make his debut for Sunderland. Hauser's an interesting fella because he was always on the fringes and always being spoken about as a player who was going to make the difference, and then it never worked out. Bless him for various reasons. But yeah, the second half of this game, that it's his debut. 66th minute is when Whitehurst gets his first yellow. He's booked for a foul on Gary Bennett. We go 1-0 up shortly after. It's the good old G-Force teaming up. Gabbiadini ends up crossing the ball low across the deck at the end of this combination with Gates. Armstrong then touches the ball on further. Colin Pascoe collects it, rounds Hesford, who's the other player making his return to Roker Park. He rounds Hesford and puts the ball into the empty net. Now, Gabbiadini's an interesting one because Whitehurst was always meant to have been his minder. I don't know if you remember though, lads. Marco Gabbiadini didn't need looking after. He could take care of.
He could handle a lot of it, didn't he?
Yeah, he could take care of himself. He was just back from suspension, and he then gets booked for dissent moments after the goal. So he had this fiery side to him, and yeah. I don't know, it just always makes me laugh, this idea that Whitehurst was there as an enforcer for Gabbiadini when he didn't mind the aggressive side to it anyway.
I think that it might have been because Marco didn't mind the aggressive side that Dennis Smith wanted somebody like Whitehurst alongside him to try to take a bit of the pressure away from doing that, because I think, Marco had a short fuse in his early days.
He did, and yeah, maybe that was a case of, oh well, the referee will ignore Gabbiadini if Whitehurst given it some as well. Now, another thing that contributes to Whitehurst in his eventual sending off, in the 77th minute, he looks odds on to score, but Tony Norman is very brave. He dives at his feet to whip the ball off his toes before he scores. Shortly after that, Marco makes it 2-0, and it's game over virtually. So there you go. There you've got this incident where Whitehurst could and should have made it 1-1, and then in the blink of an eye, it's game over. It's 2-0 to Sunderland. Gabbiadini's goal is a real classy affair. He's got his back to goal, but he turns, he shrugs off a couple of defenders, and then curls the ball in past Hesford from the edge of the box. So there's all of this building up in the background, and seconds later, the occasion, the fact that Whitehurst is perhaps a little bit frustrated with himself, he goes and gets his second yellow, and you're dead right, Martin. It was because of a late tackle on John McPhail this time, and Whitehurst, he's walking off even before the referee gets a chance to actually send him off. He knows what he's done. It's not the first time in his career. I think he just writes it off as a bad afternoon and gets himself away, gets himself down to the changing rooms. So that's his story. But in all of this, Hauser has come on and made his debut. Gates was the one that worked with Gabbiadini the most. He's tried Whitehurst. He tries various other options. He tries Hauser a few times. But in all the hullabaloo of Whitehurst being sent off, Smith decides now's the time to give Hauser a few minutes. He comes on, he's bright enough, he has a couple of touches, but the game's pretty much done by that point. It's not the best opportunity for him to shine. And as I say, he ends up just being one of this long line of players at Smith. Birchin, I think, might have played with Gabbiadini at points in the third division.
It
never works out, and he always goes back to Eric Gates, and that is the one that the Gabbiadini flourishes with. So, listen, I've got a lot of time for Hauser, and I think we'll touch on him again because he has a game in February 1990 where he does well for Sunderland. I think he's a nice fella. He always comes across. He's another one who's been on a Haway The Podcast edition, I think, unless I'm making it up. I think he's even got a Sunderland tattoo, Hauser. So he really appreciates his time at the club, loved being here, but it never seemed to match up between this player who was relatively expensive and who had a lot of talk about him in the press. His actual playing time never seemed to tie in with that. But a pretty interesting day to make your debut, and he's probably watching Whitehurst at the other end of the pitch and thinking, crikey, English football's a bit wild, isn't it?
I can always think about where Thomas Hauser's concerned. I had a really good friend, just a little bit older than us, that used to support Sunderland, and we used to fight about Hauser because I was underwhelmed by him, and he used to like him, and but his nickname for him was Shit. And I was so busy arguing the toss with him about the merits of him. It took us about a season to realise what the joke was in his nickname. You know, I was a bit slow on the uptake on that one. I was underwhelmed by Thomas Hauser. I have to say, I couldn't see quite what all the fuss was about, but that was just me. He got my support when he was on the pitch. I like to give people a chance, you know, but I would have liked to have been proved wrong.
He seemed to have a lot of trouble with injuries, didn't he? He always picked up. He never really got a clean run of 5 or 6 months without having some sort of injury. And of course, he had a long-term injury when we got promoted to the First Division. But Dennis Smith was always dead keen on partnering Marco with a big man. And in history remembers the G-Force, remembers Gates and Gabbiadini hitting it off and that being Dennis Smith's strike force. But the reality was Dennis Smith kept trying to change it. Keith Birchin was the player that Marco was originally signed to partner. Birchin gets injured in Marco's debut, or his second game, I think.
Yeah.
Away at Fulham, I think Birchin broke his collarbone or broke his jaw. And then he signs Billy Whitehurst to partner Marco. And another interesting thing about that, Billy Whitehurst wore 10 and Marco wore 9 for the spell that Whitehurst was at Roker Park, which I always thought was really strange. This random, there must have been some thought process behind it, but I could never figure out what it was. Gates came back into the team, but then he signed Hauser to try to get that big man, little man thing going again. Never quite managed to find the right target man, I guess, to partner Marco. But yeah, Hauser, his goal scoring record for starts wasn't actually too bad. He used to get a few goals, didn't he? But again, he never looked completely convincing, I don't think, whenever he played. But whether that was due to not getting a true run in the side or not, I don't know. But yeah, there we go. That was the story of Thomas Hauser's debut.
Yeah, the amount of times Gary Bennett used to be posted messing upfield, was he not trying to get the role as the big man was playing beside Marco?
Well, Martin Crosby tried Gary Bennett up front at Cambridge one day, and that did not work out too well.
No, yes.
The G-Force was a big man, little man. It was just that Gabbiadini ended up being the big man in comparison to Gatesy. So he did get his wish, just not as he envisaged it, perhaps.
It's interesting because obviously Dennis Smith wanted that option to go long and go to somebody's chest, go to somebody's head, and obviously to Gates everything was into feet. So it wouldn't have necessarily changed the roles that they were playing.
Yeah.
Gabbiadini would have always been on the shoulder of the last man and always making those runs inside the full-back and centre-half. But it just would have been different if you had somebody coming a bit deeper who was 6'4" rather than 5'7" or whatever Gates was.
It was a shame the Keith Birchin injury. I did always think that Keith Birchin was a good a good forward. I really think he would have been a good foil for. I can say that because I don't feel they got a great chance together, Birchin and
No, it didn't,
Gabbiadini.
did
Yeah.
No, but to be fair to Eric Gates, he got back in the team, and I think at the time he was still transfer listed. The club were trying to move him on
Yeah.
because of his wages and all that sort of stuff. So he made his way back into the side and did it very well.
If Gates and Gabbiadini were the G-force, would Birchin and Gabbiadini have been the Bee Gees, perhaps? Would that have been the nickname they would have been given? And I can't believe I've actually put my hand up to say that, because it's not strong enough a joke to have been said out loud, I don't think.
No, but it maybe would have hit the right note with the fans, Andrew.
There you go.
You said it was a tragedy when he got injured.
It's like the G-force here setting each other up.
Guilty.
Right, we will get this week cracking. February the 23rd, 1895. Tom Watson's Sunderland side beat Sheffield United 2-0 at Newcastle Road Ground. Andy McCready and Johnny Campbell got the goals on that occasion. 1952, Sunderland played Wolves at Molineux. We beat them 3-0. Trevor Ford got 2 and Billy Bingham got 1. 1974, Sunderland beat Sheffield Wednesday 1-0 at Hillsborough. Vic Hallam got the goal for Sunderland, and Ken Knighton was in the team for Sheffield Wednesday. Now, we talk about Joe Hinnigan in his signing a few weeks ago. In 1980, he made his debut in a home game against Luton Town. Sunderland won 1-0, and John Cook, who went on to obviously have a long association with the club as kitman as well, got his first senior goal. 1985, now this is another striker who Dennis Smith tried to sign, John Byrne. He was in the QPR team at Loftus Road, and we got beat 1-0. John Byrne got the goal for QPR on that occasion. 1991, Dennis Smith's Sunderland side went to Highfield Road to play Coventry, who were managed by Terry Butcher, and that was a 0-0 draw. I wonder if Terry Butcher was playing that day, actually, because he was a player manager for Coventry, wasn't he? I can't recall seeing him on the team sheet, but he did certainly pull on the Coventry shirt a few occasions when he took over there. 2008, Sunderland got beat 1-0 at Portsmouth by a Jermaine Defoe penalty on 69 minutes. So this is future Sunderland strikers scoring against us on February the 23rd. This is a bit of a trend here. In 2019, Luke O'Nien and Aidan McGeady got goals. We beat Bristol Rovers 2-0 away at the Memorial Stadium. And in 2021, Aidan O'Brien and Max Power on the score sheet as we beat Fleetwood 2-0 at home. Now, 1912, February the 24th, 43,383 people were in attendance at Roker Park, and this was a pre-World War I attendance record. It was a third-round FA Cup tie against West Brom, but we got beat 2-1. Arthur Bridget got our goal. 1937, Sunderland beat Middlesbrough 4-1 at Roker Park. Rich Carter got a hat-trick and Patsy Gallagher got the other goal. A chap called Jimmy Gorman missed a penalty for us after 5 minutes, but that didn't count for too much as we still went on to win 4-1. Now, 1973, Kelvin, Sunderland 2, Manchester City 2, fifth round of the FA Cup at Main Road. And we're not going to delve into this deeply, but you've written about this as part of your fantastic series on the FA Cup. That's on the website, haven't you? And this is another very memorable game and an eventful game with a future Sunderland player, Tony Towers, opening and scoring for Man City.
It was a fantastic game. Loads going on and off the pitch. I have written about it. What I will say to you is Mickey Horswell scores a goal that goes completely under the radar. When folk went on and on about Paul Gascoigne's goal against Scotland, Mickey Horswell scores a goal that's every bit as good. And that's possibly the reason why Tony Towers gets sent off. Coming towards the end of that game, him and Horswell went nose to nose for the whole of that game, and it was part of the entertainment of that game was them two going at each other. It was bloody good fun watching it, I tell you. Entertainment of sorts. Brilliant game, brilliant memory.
Yeah, Billy Hughes got Sunderland's other goal on 68, and it was an own goal by Jimmy Montgomery. officially
It
on
should never have
72.
been a goal.
No.
It was terrible. It was it was like a throwback to the blimmin', I don't know, to the 30s. He was just about charged into the back of the net. That's what I would say to you from where I was standing.
Well, if that hadn't been allowed, there would have been all sorts of things that we would never have experienced in that cup run, wouldn't it? So there you go. It was all for the greater good.
Stop being so bloody magnanimous about it, man.
Well, it's easy to in hindsight, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Gives you 20/20 vision.
Well, a game that you'll want to have 20/20 vision on, 1979 on February the 24th. Newcastle United 1,
What? Yeah.
Sunderland 4.
Yeah. I've written about this one. You'll find that in there. There is actually a very funny story on this day. If anybody cares to look it up, there's a very funny story about something that happened before the game. Coming from the north, as we did to these derby games, we used to. I'll not spoil it, but we used to meet up with some Ashington friends in a pub close to the Haymarket bus station, and there was quite I'm going to call it amusing now in hindsight, but at the time it was a bit leery. But what a day, what a great game. What a great game.
In the podcast that we did just shortly after Gary Rowell's passing in December, we did talk about that game a bit, didn't we? So there's a few bits about that game. If people do want to go back and relive some memories from that, we're not going to go into that in too much depth today, but there is some stuff on the website and in that previous pod that we did in December on Gary Rowell to satisfy that fantastic memory, I think, isn't it? Because it's just a dream, isn't it? I say we're not going to talk about it much, but as a Sunderland supporter, Gary Rowell would go out at St James's Park and score a hat-trick against Newcastle. The performance, by all accounts, was a purely dominating one. We absolutely dominated them from start to finish. We decided not to go and score more goals because we'd rather take the piss. And I think after the game, Gary Rowell was asked if it meant more to him because it was against Newcastle, and he said, it does because I hate them. And it just seemed to be the perfect day, really.
Yeah, it absolutely was, man. If you can imagine your best ever day,
should get Lou Reed to write a song about it.
God, it's a good way to start this morning. Man City away, and then the 4-1 game in 1979. Fantastic. Thing was, the whole team played really, really well, and it was a really, really good team performance. But Newcastle weren't the best Newcastle team I'd ever seen, to be fair. But that's their fault.
Don't give them anything. Right, 1990. And Sunderland played Brighton and Hove Albion at Roker Park, Andrew, and a future Sunderland player was a mascot, I believe.
Yes, he was. He was. Well, you've scuppered my little quick-fire quiz because, Martin, it sounds as if you're well up on that. There must be something about the 24th of February because it was also Tony Norman's birthday, and this game against Brighton was the first Sunderland game I ever went to. So the 24th of February is a date that resonates with me. And it's now ruined because in all of my years thinking of Thomas Hauser, I never once thought of that little nickname, Kelvin, that you've given him, or your friend.
My friend.
It take you a year to get it.
Well, I know, but it's taken me 30 odd years to even think of the connection. So yeah, he had a good day, and there must be something about late February because he made his debut on the 25th, and then on the 24th of Feb 1990, so like just a day shy of his anniversary, he scores 2 goals, and they're proper like poacher's finishes as well, in the 6-yard box type of thing. So that was one of his better days. The programme that afternoon, the good old Roker review, as Martin says, there was a future Sunderland player featured in that as the lucky mascot. I'll not ask you, Martin, but Kelvin, any ideas who that was?
Well, I'll not spoil it either because I did actually read it. I was at that game as well. I can remember the chaps flying around. Yeah.
Well,
the young lads.
Aye, it was Paul Thirlwell. There was actually 3 mascots that day, and this is the deepest of deep dives now that we're looking into the background of the lucky mascots. Paul and his brother David, they were described as from Springwell Village in the programme. They both played for Springwell Juniors, and no surprise, Paul was captain of his school team at the time as well. He played for the boys' brigade as well, so he's getting plenty of football. His brother was quite sporty. His brother David was sporty by the looks of it. He played hockey, basketball, and tennis. When they do those little pictures and like a little description of what they do in their spare time and what their hobbies are and who the favourite player is. So there was a bit of run down on those two. They attended every game with their mum, who'd been going to Sunderland for 30 years. So I bet you she was as proud as anything when Paul Thirlwell broke through to the first team. Not to leave him out, the third mascot on the day was a lad called Jonathan Slee of Wellfield School, which I think is Wingate. I think that's what I remember reading. He was a good player. He was another loyal fan. So, he might be listening to this. He might still follow the lads, and that might have been his claim to fame that he was on the pitch alongside Paul Thirlwell. And it just makes me laugh. Just, when the mascots have a few pot shots at the goalkeeper in the warm-up, I wonder if he is Paul Thirlwell pinging them in with this great technique of a future professional footballer. And Tony Norman suddenly panicking, thinking, hang on, I'm getting beaten here by the mascot. We're in trouble today. So yeah, it was a big day for Hauser. It was a big day for Thirlwell. Big day for me being at the match. And do you want another little bonus point? There's a bonus point up for grabs. When I asked who else was a lucky mascot for Sunderland that season. It was later on. It was the home game against Portsmouth, and another prominent Sunderland figure was mascot that day.
So must be the same type of generation as Thirlwell, you would have thought.
Yeah.
Come through.
But he wasn't a player. He wasn't a player.
Oh, okay.
Ooh.
David Bruce.
Well done, Martin.
Is it?
Well done.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well done. David Bruce and his brother, Kelvin, were featured. They were the lucky mascots. David was 10 years old at the time. They're both from Seaburn Dean. So, whenever he talks about him being a Sunderland fan and coming from a Sunderland supporting family, it's legit. It's the real deal. And David Bruce was a member at the time of the good old Roker Rookies. So, you heard it here first. David Bruce, once he's got everything else sorted, he's perhaps going to get the Roker Rookies up and running again and get a new wave of Sunderland fan falling in love with the club. So, hey, listen, it does show that these supporter clubs and these things like letting kids be mascots, it does all come round eventually, because some of these people grow up and end up having a huge influence on the club in years to come.
You do.
Bit like yourself, Andrew.
I'm not quite on the same pay scale as David Bruce, but yeah, he's
have
making
your impact, boy. You have your impact.
Well, David Bruce is there making big decisions and shaping the future of the club. And all I get to do is talk a load of flannel about about days gone by and send you two poor boys to sleep. I think not quite as influential, sadly.
Well,
Just as important.
that's a matter of opinion, isn't it, Kelvin? I think.
Yeah, it is. It is.
1998, Sunderland played Huddersfield down at McAlpine Stadium. We won 3-2, and Alan Johnson scored the first half hat-trick. Now, the interesting thing about this is Johnson scored 2 goals in the early stage. We went 2-0 up. We got a penalty, and from memory, it was around the half-hour mark. It was certainly before half-time. It was in the first half. And Kevin Phillips gave Johnson the penalty to get his hat-trick. He scored it. It was a nice penalty. It always kind of struck me as a bit generous to give Johnson that at that stage of the game, because Huddersfield went and scored 2 goals in the second half and made it a real contest. And if we hadn't got that penalty, I wonder if there would be a few fingers pointed at Phillips and Johnson dressing room afterwards. But it was an exceptionally good performance in that first half. I was in Leeds at the time, and I'd been telling one of my mates who was a Liverpool season ticket holder, I'd been telling him all season how good we were. And I convinced him to come down to Huddersfield with me that night. And so at half time, he was going, gee, you're right, it's bloody brilliant. And then second half was a slightly different story, but we still got the 3 points in the end. 2007, this was a memorable game as well at the Stadium Lights. Sunderland played Derby County under Roy Keane. And Liam Miller got a last-minute header, I think it was, wasn't it, to win that game 2-1. Sunderland and Derby were both going for the top positions in the league, and it was a huge victory for us. David Connolly had put us up in front with a penalty to open the scoring, been pulled back to 1-1, and Miller got a last-minute header. And we had a bit of a thing to score last-minute goals that season, didn't we? We got a few last-minute winners, and Keane had them. Really, it was fitness, but it was that mental determination to keep on going. And that was just one of a few occasions where that really paid dividends. 2018 on February the 24th, this was a 3-3 draw against Middlesbrough under Chris Coleman at the Stadium Light. Joe Lasoro scored to put us 1-0 up after 11 minutes. And then Jake Clark-Salter took out Adama Traore on the left-hand side, didn't he? With an awful tackle on, I think it was about 20-odd minutes, and reduced us down to 10 men. We won the big game. We still obviously had a good chance of staying up at that point, or a theoretical chance of staying up at that point anyway. Went 1-0 up, down to 10 men. Half-time, it was still 1-0. Second half was a little bit of a different story. Patrick Bamford scored for Borough, then Grant Ledbetter stuck a penalty away. So within 8 minutes of the second half, we'd gone from 1-0 up to 2-1 down. Johnny Williams got an equaliser for us on 58. I think that was his only goal for us. I can't remember him scoring too many more. Bamford scored again on 68. And then Callum McManaman, going through all of the glorious names in this game, aren't we? Callum McManaman got an equaliser on 90. I think that was probably his only goal for Sunderland as well.
Didn't he then rather pathetically, excuse me, run whoever the Middlesbrough manager was somebody he'd had a falling out with?
Tony Pulis, I think.
Was it right? Well, yeah, he had some sort of beef with him. So there we are. We've scraped a 3-3 last-minute draw against Middlesbrough, and he's running off, making his point to Pulis as if he's just scored the winner in a World Cup final or something. Just
he was a fiery boy, McManaman. He was fiery.
He got sent off, didn't he, for a deliberate handball? And
wasn't that bloody Coleman's first proper game in charge or something? When we were winning, then it was just before half time. He was already being booked, and he punched the ball in the net.
Yeah. I mean, I remember it being one of those things where at the time I was like, oh, no way, man, that's a shocking decision by the ref. And then when you get home and you see the highlights, you're like, yeah, actually, I maybe went a bit too early on that one. But it could well have been one of Coleman's first games in charge, and just that would have summed things up perfectly, because new manager wanting to get a bit of a head of steam going, and you've got your players getting themselves sent off with moments of madness. It was just an utterly dismal season, pretty much from start to finish.
McManaman, though, he was a boy who always seemed to play well against us. And when we bought him, I actually did think that this lad would come and do some business for us, that he was just what we needed, some scrappers. We needed some boys that were going to come and play for the jersey. And he always struck me as that kind of player. But whatever he was doing when he was playing against us, we never quite saw that. I don't know whether the malaise that affected the team had just affected him as well, because we never got that, or we didn't get a lot of it anyway. But that Middlesbrough game was quite an entertaining game, wasn't it? For one reason and another. I did think they were going to just steamroll away in the second half, but it never. It gave you a bit of hope. I remember driving north back over the border thinking, ooh, this could be, we haven't dropped 2 points here. This is going to be all right, we're going to be fine. What do I know?
Those drives home, Kelvin, you've gone through so many emotions over the years. But, we had a couple of 3-3 draws that season, and on the odd day, there were times where you thought, maybe things are turning. But you mentioned it at the top of that little recap, Martin. That red card was just another perfect example of how ridiculous that season was. Yeah. Because I think you talk about kicking a player up a height. I don't think it was malicious. He just got it so horrifically wrong. And not for the last time, or not for the first time. I'm sure Clark Salter got at least one other absolutely crazy red card. But I just kicked the bloke up in the air. I think Traore had to do like a couple of mid-air somersaults before he landed. It was a ridiculous red card.
Mm-hmm. His name should have been... No need. His name should have been Alan, shouldn't it? And that way he could have been Ace Salter.
Right, on that note, we're going to take a break. We'll be back soon.
Let's be completely honest. Are you happy with your job? The fact is, a huge number of people can't say yes to that. Too many of us are stuck in a job we've outgrown or one we never really wanted in the first place. But we stick it out and we give reasons like, what if the next move is worse? And I've put years into this place. And maybe the most common one, isn't everyone miserable at work? But there's a difference between reasons for staying and excuses for not leaving. It's time to get unstuck. It's time for Strawberry.me. They match you with a certified career coach who helps you get from where you are to where you want to be, either at your existing job or by helping you find a new one. Your coach helps clarify your goals, creates a plan, and keeps you accountable along the way. Go to strawberry.me/career and get 50% off your first coaching session. That's strawberry.me/career.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for another episode on this week. Now, February the 25th, 1893. This was Sunderland's first ever game against Newcastle United, because Newcastle West End, Newcastle East End had been clubs that had played, and West End had folded. I think West End played St James's Park. East End took over at St James's Park, formed United. Anyway, Sunderland won 6-1 at St James's Park. Davy Hanna opened the scoring after 1 minute. Johnny Campbell got 4 goals and James Gillespie got the other. We played with 10 men for the majority of the game because Davy Hanna went off injured after about half an hour or so. And that was a nice way to kick off that relationship.
Any mention, Martin, any mention of fans getting into bother around the Haymarket before kick-off? Or was it a bit more civil in those days?
Just a horse, apparently. 1950, a first-half goal from Len Shackleton at Blackpool gave us the win and put us up to third in the top flight. 1961, Ralphie Goodchild scored a hat-trick in the first half, and his only appearance of the season was a 4-2 win at Leeds. Colin Granger was in the Leeds side that day, and it was a 4-1. We were up at half-time. Ian Lawther had got the other goal.
He's a Strange story, Ralphie. Ralphie Goodchild. His nickname was Ralphie. It's a strange story about him because his goal scoring record with us was pretty good. I think he scored 21 goals in 45 games for us and was quite highly regarded by the fans. But he comes in, he plays that game against Leeds, and then he's off on his travels. He went to Brighton. And I remember speaking to one of his extended family members a few years ago, and they told me that there was a bit of a mystery of sorts about why he suddenly was sold. When he seemed to be doing quite well. There was a lot of competition around Ian Lowther. And I'm trying to think, there were a couple of others, and I think Brian Clough was, he was either, he wouldn't be at the club then in Goodchild's earlier days, definitely not. But by 1965 he was, yeah. It's a very, very strange story that there is an on this day. If anybody knows any more about that, I would love to know what the story was about Ralphie Goodchild, because he seemed a decent enough player.
Well, if anybody has any info on that, email us at Haway The Podcast, safc@gmail.com, and we will get those emails read out next week. 1995, on February the 25th, we beat Southend 1-0 at Roots Hall. Steve Agnew got a goal on 44 minutes. And 2004, 2 goals from Tommy Smith in extra time gave us a 5th round FA Cup replay victory at Birmingham City. February the 26th, 1955, Charlie Cannonball Fleming, the confused ostrich, scored 2 goals as Sunderland beat the Mags 2-1 at St James's Park. 83, Gary Rowell got a penalty, and that was a decisive goal as Sunderland beat Man City 3-2. Ian Atkins opened the scoring on 55. Gary Rowell got a goal on 65. Tommy Caton got one back. Man City on 68. Gary Rowell got the penalty on 83, and Kevin Reeves got a goal for Man City on 85 minutes. And Dennis Stewart was in the Man City team that day in 1983, 10 years after winning the FA Cup with Sunderland.
So was Joe Corrigan.
Yeah, okay.
In the team as well for City, two boys from 73. I'll tell you something about that game. Leighton James, that day, he was shithouser supreme that day. It was, he was a player you always loved to hate when he played for other teams against you. That day, I remember coming away from the ground thinking, I'm so glad we've got him in our team, because he didn't have, he worked his ticket with the ball, but he worked his ticket with his mouth as well. He never stopped the whole game going at it with somebody or other. Well, I would love to know what his foul count was, because there was some pretty wild challenges coming. I think Dennis Stewart fouled him at one point as well. Not a lad given to fits of peak Dennis, but I'm sure he gave him a kick at one point. What a great shithousery game he played that day.
Well, 9 years later, in 1992, this was Sunderland's FA Cup 5th round replay at Upton Park against West Ham. We'd drawn against them in the 5th round game at Roker Park, went back down to Upton Park. I think everybody thought Sunderland's chance had gone with the draw at home, but we went down to London and John Burns scored 2 and David Rush got a late goal to give us a 3-2 win. I just remember Tony Norman making a brilliant save. I think it was from a fullback called Tim Breaker, and he put a great shot in. Norman kind of went over with his wrong arm and tipped it over to his left, tipped over the bar. But great night, great day, and 2 brilliant. One of John Burns' goals, he just kind of slalomed through the defence and stuck it away, didn't he? And David Rush was really coming through and made an impact there. And again, that was a confusing team, because on our day with that team in 91-92, we could beat anyone. But we had so many off days where we couldn't beat anyone, didn't we? And we ended up getting the cup final and just staying up as well, which
we just needed two players for that team, Martin.
Yeah, two very good players. We might have done all right. I think we suffered, didn't we, from the fixture backlog that we had in the end of that season. I remember there was 1 week where I think we played 3 midweek games, or certainly we played on the Saturday and then Tuesday and Thursday. I remember playing Ipswich at home on the Tuesday and Plymouth at home on the Thursday. And this summed Sunderland up. Ipswich were going good guns towards the top of the table. We played them on Tuesday. I beat them 3-0, played absolutely fantastic. 2 days later, we played Peter Shilton's Plymouth at Roker Park. They were down the bottom of the table and we got beat 1-0. Terrible performance. That summed up that side, really. 2005, Cardiff came to Wearside and we beat them 2-1. And this result actually moved us into an automatic promotion spot and we stayed there for the rest of the season. Gary Breen and Marcus Stewart got the goals for us. Darren Williams came off the bench for Cardiff after only 5 minutes to play the majority of the game, and Graham Kavanagh was in the Cardiff team that afternoon as well. And 2002, this was the game that Alex Neil took us to Wigan. And Alex Neil obviously wasn't Sunderland's manager for too long, but this was a performance that really showed Alex Neil had stamped his authority on that team. Wigan were going for promotion as well, weren't they? They were going really well up the top of the table. And we turned in a really strong defensive performance, but managed to get the goals as well. So Bailey Wright opened the scoring early on, and we got 2 penalties, which Ross Stewart converted both of them. But it was one of those performances, you go, actually, you can see what the new manager's doing. And he very quickly changed the style of play, changed how we were doing things. It was a different mentality about the team. It was really evident in that performance, and that really set us up to go and obviously get the playoff final victory over Wycombe a couple of 3 months later.
We were at that game, Martin, and I remember the drive down being a bit flat. And yeah, I think we were actually quite a few points off where we needed to be. So it wasn't as if the win got us right back into the mix, but there was a completely different mood on the drive back. Because, yeah, there was something about that performance that we hadn't expected, but you were like, oh, hang on, there's something different now about this team. That they looked at, even when they won big under Lee Johnson prior to that, there was sometimes fears that it was all a bit flash, whereas this was like, no, we've taken apart a really good team and been just a level above. And I seem to think as well, do you remember that defender we had?
Jamad?
Yes, I think he played in that game, and that was a bit like, oh, so this is a untested lad, but he came in and gave a good performance. So yeah, there was a real mood shift around that game, and it was pivotal.
Well, this actually changed everything. This game, this result, and the confidence it must have given the players was one thing, but I think it changed the mood. As you say, on the drive down, you weren't feeling too positive about things. And that would be because we'd only won 1 in the last 10 league games. So for Sunderland at League One level to win 1 in 10 it's awful. We'd obviously had the managerial change, but Alex Neil had come in. We'd drawn away at Wimbledon. We'd got beat at home off MK Dons, and we'd drawn at home at Burton Albion. So it's not as if Alex Neil came in and made a massive impact immediately. And whether he was kind of feeling his way into the job or not, but this is a game, in my mind, it was different from this game and for the rest of his time here. It was a different mentality. I don't know if it was just a few weeks on the training field with the players or something clicked in this game, or after that run of his first 3 games, he thought, I need to do something completely different here with this lot. I don't know what changed, but something changed. And from there on in, we went on a brilliant run. We didn't lose another game. And we won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 games out of 14 and 15 towards the end of that season. So it set us up brilliantly to go on and do what we ended up doing at the end of that season. But as you say, Andrew, when you look at the league position, we were 7th, I think, going into that game.
It's funny looking back on that season, because a bit like with Gates and Gabbiadini, your memory plays tricks with you, and you assume Gates and Gabbiadini hit it off and then were our strike force forevermore. But it didn't work like that. And that promotion season as well, you just assume, well, we went up, we must have been brilliant throughout. But we had times when we were top of the table, and then in the blink of the eye would even fallen out of the playoff places, and we were needing snookers just to get back into the top 6. A real season of highs and lows, and I know it didn't end too cleverly with Alex Neil, but he completed an amazing job, really, that first season when he came in. And when you mentioned some of those early results, there was a shocking defeat at Doncaster in all of that. And did you say Cheltenham? The Cheltenham loss was under him, or was that under Dodds?
No, so Doncaster and Cheltenham were under Mike Dodds. Alex Neil's first game was away at AFC Wimbledon, and that was a draw. We came up to the Stadium of Light for his next game. We got beat 2-1 off MK Dons. I think that was when Connor Wickham came on and scored late on.
Yeah.
And then we had a home draw against Burton, and that was a midweek before this Wigan game. And that was the one where Ross Stewart scored an equaliser in injury time. So it was the last-minute injury time equaliser to rescue a point. And you can't go and we've gone 3 steps backwards here from that performance at the end of the year against Sheffield Wednesday, where we beat them 5-0 to go top of the league. In 8 weeks or 7 weeks, to unravel to the extent it seemed to have unravelled was unbelievable. But again, something clicked, and whether it was him going, I just need to change things completely, rather than trying to guide this group of players to do something different or what. But who knows? But it all worked out well in the end, didn't it?
It did. I don't wish to be rude and disparaging about other clubs, but this week in Sunderland's history, there's a lot of really big stories, and the Man City game and the Newcastle win, they're arguably 2 of Sunderland's most well-remembered and loved post-war games. Absolutely massive in Sunderland history. So it really does bring home how much of a shock it was, and how much of a disgrace it was, really, that same club then finds itself pleased to get a draw against Burton Albion at home. I listen, no disrespect to Burton, and fair play to them, because they've put their resources to better use than we did in that period. But when you're talking about losing at Cheltenham and all of this type of thing, it even though we all lived through it, and it was only a few years ago, I think you don't realise at the time just how much of a disaster it was for the club to be in that position.
It was.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll not linger on it too much, will we?
Sorry, gents. Sorry.
Oh, good.
Because we've got a very, very interesting one to go to now. And we're going to skip forward a couple of days to February the 28th. And we're going to go all the way back to 1891 for Sunderland's first ever FA Cup semi-final.
Yeah, again, another big game, and a period when Sunderland were starting to mix it with the elite and starting to be one of the early giants of the game. And we joke, don't we, during the pods, that Sunderland in its early years were often responsible for changes to the game, changes tactically, changes to the rules. I think
we don't joke, it's just factually correct.
Well, it is. Yeah, it is. It is. I think, isn't it the case now that goalkeepers can't handle the ball out of the box because of Sunderland? I think it might have been. Yeah, he used to take the ball up to the halfway line, basketball style. So Sunderland were pioneers, And in 1890-91, it was our first season in the league. And as you say, it was the first time Sunderland had reached the FA Cup semi-final. We drew on this particular day 3-3 with Notts County at Bramall Lane. The replay was then in March at the same ground. We lost that 2-0 and Notts ended up losing the final to Blackburn. But they did finish third in the top flight. So they were a quality side, Notts. Sunderland, for their part, finished seventh. That was their first league season, as I say. So to finish seventh and to reach the cup semi-final, that's good going. Like that's good work from Sunderland. They certainly weren't out of the depths coming into the league. As part of our cup run, we beat Everton, who won the Football League that year. They won the championship. So again, we're a quality side. We're not just coming into the Football League and making up the numbers. We're a class act. Round 3 in this cup run, which at that point, round 3 was also the quarter-final stages.
Yeah, right.
We beat Forest 4-0. So had Forest beaten us, they would have been playing Notts County, but we beat them after they, in the previous round, had prevented an Old Sunderland tie by beating Sunderland Albion. So there's a little bit of little quirk there. Interestingly, though, the Sunderland Albion Forest game, that went to a replay, and the replay was also at Bramall Lane. So
Yeah, right.
Sunderland teams were making regular trips to Sheffield at the time. It was about 25,000 there for our game, for our semi-final. I think if I've read the reports right, they even had to put temporary stands up at the ground. Bramall Lane was used for a lot of prestigious matches, but at that time it was only 3-sided because they shared it with a cricket club. And one side of the ground where the camera is nowadays, if I've got my bearings, that used to be like a long walk all the way past the cricket grounds over to the pavilion.
I think it was like that for quite a while, wasn't it?
Oh yeah. The three stands was a feature right up until the 70s.
Yeah.
I think it was in living memory that they put a fourth stand in. Bramall Lane though was like a bit of a mecca for sport, because I think Yorkshire played a lot of games there as well, and I think there might have even been cricket international level games. So it was this highly respected ground, despite only having 3 football stands. But there was a big crowd there. I think there was temporary stands put in, if I've interpreted the information correctly. As part of the crowd, there was 278 passengers that had left Sunderland at 7:25 on an excursion train, and then several more trains followed, like regular timetable trains, but there was this excursion put on for it. Little snippet I pulled from the papers. It says there was glorious weather for the match, and as early as 1 o'clock, spectators began to converge on Bramall Lane, which was choked with buses, cabs, hansoms, and other vehicles loaded with passengers. Now, hansoms, apologies if this is well known, but I didn't actually recognise what that was. So I had a little look, and it appears to be like a type of carriage that was horse-drawn, 2-wheeled carriage, horse-drawn, but it just paints this lovely picture of like pre-match excitement and everybody, being dragged to the ground and being drawn into it.
How were they to travel on, Kelvin?
Cheeky sod. I was just going to say that they only got rid of them in concert last year.
Just to point out, Kelvin, I had no part in that joke. That was all Martin's work. I wouldn't try and upset you like that, budge off your game. But anyway, there we go. That was proper brown nosing, wasn't it, as well?
It certainly
Kelvin,
was.
I'm not
Wasn't me,
being mean.
Kelvin.
Yeah,
Wasn't me.
it's
I
all that,
wouldn't. I
man.
wouldn't do that, Kelvin.
Exactly. I respect you too much. Yeah. I don't know. Just I like this idea though about how everybody, like, Bramall Lane almost is like magnetized, and people are coming from far afield to come to this big game. Yeah. The snippet says the enclosure filled rapidly, and an hour before the start, not an inch of standing room was left. A sea of faces stretched right back, crowning the long walls which surrounded the pitch. Those who had secured places early stuck to them. Locomotion was impossible, and the people were jammed in. About 30 press men, including the Echo, were present, as was also a strong contingent of not supporters. Special trains brought in around 10,000 persons, and cards were sported in their hats by all the rival partisans. Portraits of the teams met a ready sail, and hawkers with badges drove a roaring trade. The pitch was carefully sanded, but the turf was greasy. The feeling was in favour of Sunderland, who were established favourites. So the scene was set. That all sounds exciting, and all sounds remarkably like a modern match day. People still are buying the merchandise at the club shop. There's still, I don't know if they'd like to be described as hawkers, but there's still people selling badges outside the grounds. It's nothing's changed in that part. But back then there was that extra excitement that football was starting to really grab hold, and this was probably one of the first times that this atmosphere and this fever had captured Sunderland fans. In one of the reports I read, they felt that this was most likely the biggest number of people from Sunderland to all leave the town at once. There'd never been such a big
Mass
number.
exodus.
Yeah. So this was a massive occasion. The starting lineup: Ted Doig in goal, Tom Porteous, John Oliver, Hughie Wilson, Will Gibson, and John Murray. And then the forwards of Jack Smith, John Harvey, Johnny Campbell, who we've mentioned already in this episode, and John Scott. There's two big absences from the team. Our captain, John Auld, he was a massive figure in Sunderland history, but he was out injured. And then one of our main goal-scoring threats, he'd actually scored a hat-trick against County in the league when we'd beaten them 4-0 in our previous meeting. A lad called Jimmy Miller. He sometimes got referred to as Jamie Miller, and his surname was often spelt one of two ways. But make no mistake, he was a pivotal player for Sunderland. He just suffered a shock bereavement in his family, so he missed the game. He had to go back to Scotland because his father had passed away rather suddenly. So Sunderland weren't quite at full strength. Busy opening half. Sunderland have a goal disallowed for offside, and then Notts County go and score their opener through a lad called Andrew McGregor, and Doig is fully expecting that to be offside as well, like to the point where he doesn't even bother trying to save the effort. He's so convinced that it's offside. It was blatant, seemingly. So they take the lead, and there's a bit of anger about that. Sunderland across that the goal hasn't been ruled out, whereas their earlier strike had been. So the niggle's already starting to grow. This becomes quite a controversial game in the end, and the niggle is happening pretty much from the early stages. We do come back, we do equalise, and we go 2-1 up through John Smith and John Harvey. But by half time, it's level because of a lad called Tom McInnes. equalises for the opposition. I think at the time they were referred to as the Lambs. I'm not quite sure what the reason for that nickname was, but we think of them now as the Magpies, whereas they were being referred to as the Lambs at the time.
Yeah.
In the second half, only 5 minutes after the break, Jimmy Oswald has a shot that hits the crossbar. We claim that the ball then goes over the crossbar, but Notts County claim that it hits the underside of the crossbar and goes in. Really controversial moment. The referee gives it as a goal. He awards the goal, and Sunderland are not best pleased. We equalise with about 15 minutes left. Campbell gets a really powerful equaliser to earn a replay. But this goal, Notts' third goal, is the moment that is really hotly disputed, and the row about it rumbles on, not just in the immediate aftermath, but in the days and weeks and months that follows. The ref, by the way, was based in Sheffield. He was called Charles Clegg, or J.C. Clegg. He is then involved in the replay as well, so we'll touch on him again in a moment. The replay is scheduled for the 11th of March. Sunderland don't play in between that first game and the replay because Derby County rather graciously allow us to postpone our scheduled league game with them because they recognise that the cup semi-final is an important occasion in the wider game, and they see that it's important to the cup that Sunderland are able to go in fully refreshed, which is, it's madness now. It just wouldn't happen. I mean, you've got our next cup opponents, Port Vale or Bristol City. I think their fourth round game is only getting played a few days before one of them gets to play Sunderland, because their league fixtures are so compact and condensed, and none of their opposing clubs are willing to give up the game. That they want their games to take place. So fair play to Derby for that. That was quite interesting. We spend some time at the Roker Hotel, and then we go to Ilkley to prepare for this game. We prepare for the replay, like I say, without any football. We come into it fresh. On this occasion, the special excursion train brings 224 passengers. This was all documented in the papers at the time, whereas I don't think it would get a second mention now, how many people travelled to an away match on the train. The departure this time was at 9:35 from Sunderland, and the paper, I quote, says it included the more influential supporters of Sunderland who were leaving for the cutlery town. So this train must have been rather fancy and maybe had one or two of the big wigs. I don't know if it had the directors or the more prominent Sunderland supporters on it. As I say, when they get to the ground, they get back to Bramall Lane, they know the way because I've already been there recently. Clegg is the ref again. It's an easy journey for him because he's based in the area. This time, Notts win quite easily. They win 2-0 with Oswald and McGregor scoring again. But there's disputes in this match also, and a really long argument after McGregor's goal because Sunderland thought the shot had gone wide, but the referee, Clegg, was adamant that it had gone the correct side of the post. Now, that type of thing nowadays, it's easily resolved because there's a net. So you can see straight away whether it's gone the right side of the goal frame. But we didn't have that luxury then because, bizarrely, in a professional game, in a high-profile game, there were no nets. So you couldn't see, you couldn't be sure, had the ball hit the crossbar and gone over, or had it gone under the bar and gone in? Had this shot been wide, or had it gone in between the keeper and the post? Just madness, and you can see why there were arguments at the time. Oddly, there was nothing said about the controversy from the first game in the Echo in their big match report. The Northern Echo didn't make anything of it either. It does touch on an incident in the first half where there was rows about a Notts County goal and whether that had crossed the line. So you've got that. You've got these two offside goals that were subject of a bit of a row. You've then got the goal that was awarded. So I wonder if this was all playing in the referee's head, not just in the first game, but in the replay. The Echo does, after the replay, briefly refer to the disputed goal, but just in passing. Nowadays, it would be the main talking point. It would be the point that the article in the match report starts with, lads, wouldn't it? You know, there'd be an absolute hell on.
Uproar.
Exactly. But it just gets a very fleeting mention in the paper, in the official reports and that. But behind the scenes, the club is still unhappy and it does get brought up and it does get taken to the authorities and it gets mentioned by the Football Association and the Football League are aware of it. You've got to bear in mind, referees at the time stayed pretty much on the halfway line. So referees are trying to judge something that's happened at the other end of the pitch. There's no nets there. It's just rife for disputes. And it's tight games, important games are always going to end up falling into these types of arguments. I mean, it sounds like the types of things me and me mates would have down at Seaburn Red. You know, the cliche of jumpers for goalposts. We would forever be arguing about had it gone the right side of the post or not, or had it gone in under this mythical post, mythical bar, which the height of which seemed to change depending on whether you were arguing for or against the goal coming in. And, oh, well, it's so-and-so who was in goals only short, so he's bound to think it was gone over the bar, but it's because he's not as tall as somebody else. So you'd have all these bizarre disputes. But in like the professional context, nets had been used a couple of times. There was a fella from Liverpool who'd come up with the concept in 1889 after a dispute in a game between Everton and Accrington Stanley. But it was only the season after this semi-final that they were made compulsory in cup games and league games. Whilst the press didn't make too much of it, people were coming round to this general conclusion, particularly with the semi-final being a high-profile game. They couldn't let this keep happening. They couldn't have the results of games being under so much scrutiny because of something so simple of being unable to determine whether an effort was a goal or not. I mean, it's the fundamental point of playing football. So if you can't determine whether a goal's being scored, you're in a lot of bother. Nets had been used, as I say, in one or two games, but they weren't compulsory before Sunderland's semi-final. I mean, there was even international games at the time that had rows breaking out about the legitimacy of goals. Sunderland and their semi-final seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. It was brought in the following season, but as I say, the arguments just sound so bizarre. It had such a bearing on the replay and the original game. And the daftest thing is, in all of this, earlier on in the decade, Bramall Lane, which, as I say, was one of the main stadiums in the country, they did have nets, but they weren't used as goal nets. They were behind the goals to stop wayward shots flying off into the crowd, or perhaps this stand where it was an empty stand and it was a cricket ground that probably had nets there to stop the ball going off into the past the boundary and into the cricket ground. So somebody had thought, oh, I would need nets to stop the ball getting lost and taking ages to retrieve. But that was before anybody had the bright idea of, hang on, lads, we might need goal nets here to just make it make the referee's job a bit easier. So there you go, a game where Sunderland's involvement's had a huge bearing on football and something that we just take for granted now that there's goal nets, but in the early days it was an afterthought.
It wasn't. Again, it's one of those things that we've discovered as we've gone through these podcasts, haven't we, about the influence, as we said at the top of that the influence that Sunderland have had over different developments within football, whether it's goal nets, whether it's keepers not being able to handle outside the box, centre halves going for corners. There's been all sorts of things, haven't there, that we've uncovered over the months that basically mean that Sunderland invented football and that football wouldn't exist without Sunderland.
Well, exactly. I mean, we are pioneers. And even the FA Cup itself, the FA Cup was invented by a lad who was born in Sunderland, Charles Alcock, who, again, for another little quirk, the street he was born on was also the street where the first meeting was held to form Sunderland AFC. So we've got so many tentacles in the history of football and so many involvements. If it wasn't for Sunderland, the game wouldn't be quite as we know it now.
Thank God for nets. I mean, imagine games like the 1966 World Cup would have been a shambles, wouldn't it? The World Cup final.
I don't know what Sunderland's involvement was in goal line technology, I admit. I haven't researched that one, Kelvin. But yeah, we'll let you have that one. Go on then. You can keep telling yourself England never won the World Cup.
Yeah, he had to balance himself out after mentioning Paul Gascoigne's goal against Scotland earlier in the podcast.
Absolutely.
Get the equilibrium restored. We will take a very short break then. Back soon. Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for another episode on this week. Now, February the 27th, 1937. This, of course, was the season that Sunderland won the FA Cup. And we went down to the Hawthorns to play a game against West Brom. And this sounds like a superb game. Well, superb game for the neutral, because West Brom won 6-4. But West Brom went 1-0 up, and we got back to 2-1. They went 3-2 up. We got back to 3-3. They went 4-3 up. We missed a penalty to make it 4-4, so it was still 4-3. They went 5-3 and 6-3. And we got back to 6-4. But, of course, the goals ran out. Time ran out. But Eddie Burbanks, Rach Carter, Bobby Gurney, and Len Duns got the goals for us on that occasion. And yes, Rach Carter missed a penalty. Now, 1973, we talked about the Man City draw a little bit earlier, Kelvin, and this was a replay. Vic Hallam scored a fantastic goal in the 3-1 win against Man City. Billy Hughes got 2 as well, and Franny Lee got Man City's goal. But again, that's a game that deserves a podcast all on its own, I think, doesn't it? But superb night at Roker Park.
Yeah, it's listed, isn't it, by loads of fans that were there as the best game they ever saw under the lights at Roker Park. You know, it was in itself a fun. There was loads of drama in the game, including Malcolm Allison. You know, all the stuff that went on beforehand in between the first game at Main Road and the replay and everything that they were going to do to us, and you know, Allison betting a month's wages that they would be going through. But it was in itself a fantastic game of football. City actually played really well on the night, and it was a fantastic memory of a night under the lights at Roker Park.
Can't beat it. 1988, I was kind of going from one extreme to the other with this episode, but 1988, we played down at Aldershot and got beat 3-2. I've actually just written about this for Friday's on this day article on the website. So if anybody's really interested in this, it is actually quite interesting. What I'm doing on Friday is following the run-in to the 87-88 season. And at this point, things actually weren't very happy. There was an awful lot of criticism of Dennis Smith. There was a drop in form. We hadn't been playing very well. The previous week, we'd played, I can't remember who we played at home now, but we played a team at home and won, but we'd we had so many players out through flu and illness and all this sort of stuff. We just cobbled this team together. Dennis Smith said the players were basically coughing up lungs and stuff after the game because they managed to get through the game. In midweek, we played Bristol Rovers and got turned over 4-0 away at Bristol Rovers. We go to Aldershot with the team still struggling with illness. And we went 1-0 up with a John McPhail penalty. They equalised. We went 2-1 up with a Gabby Adini goal. They pulled it back to 2-2 after 30 minutes. And then Steve Berry, who, of course, had a spell at Roker Park as a player, scored the winner just 2 minutes after half-time. And we couldn't manage to get it turned around. But again, you look back on the 87-88 season and think, oh, that was a pretty... And obviously, it was a very successful season because we ended up winning the league and going back up to the second division. But it wasn't all straightforward. It wasn't all plain sailing. And we had these dips of form. And there was real pressure building on the team. You know, it's been interesting going through the letters pages of the Echo, the Football Echo on Saturday, and seeing the criticism of the people are calling for new signings. There was actually one that was we tried to sign John Byrne. Dennis Smith had decided against signing John Byrne because he would have cost $250,000, and Dennis Smith wanted 3 players rather than just one. That would have been his whole budget, and people were happy that we hadn't signed John Byrne because we needed more than one player to supplement the team to get us promoted. So it's obviously very, again, hindsight's wonderful, isn't it? But as we know, that season turned out successfully.
Martin, you might want to have your finger over the buzzer here. You might want to cut this bit out because it might be a story that you're going to mention when you write these up. But either the Bristol Rovers defeat or the Aldershot defeat, I can't remember which one it was, but afterwards the players were in like a communal bath, and the light fitting above it suddenly worked itself loose and was inches from dropping into the bath. So it was like still powered at one end. It was like one of those long strip lighting that came loose. So we were like fractions away from an utter tragedy, you know, and that also added to this really bad week or so for Sunderland. I think it upset the players a lot. It left them rather shook up, and it was an example of how in the 80s kind of football was behind the times and the facilities weren't good enough. I mean, you wouldn't dream of having the potential for that type of incident now, where you've got electrical work just loose above a body of water. So obviously results were poor, and that shook the team up. But this moment was a real... It doesn't get spoken about. It's not a particularly huge story, but yeah, that really left some players upset, and just a moment that thankfully we're able to talk about very quickly and very briefly, but could have been different, and could have been a sad tale.
It's interesting because there's the game against Bristol Rovers, so that was at Twerton Park, I think, and it was a really angry game, and obviously Sunderland were pissed off with the results and the performance. We played terribly and deserved the result. But very early on in the game, Gordon Armstrong had gone into a tackle. Apparently it was a late tackle. Dennis Smith said it wasn't a really malicious tackle, but it was a late tackle, which ended Kenny Hibbert's career. So Kenny Hibbert was a former Wolves player, brother of Terry, who was at Newcastle. He was the Bristol Rovers assistant manager to Jerry Francis. And very early on in the game, Armstrong flew into a tackle, and basically he ended his career. So there's this needle throughout the game because of that. After the game, you know, I actually wasn't aware of the stuff that you were talking about there. I hadn't discovered that. But there was accusation that Sunderland had trashed the dressing room after the game. So immediately after the game, there was all this stuff that Bristol Rovers had put out, that Sunderland had trashed the away dressing room. And Dennis Smith had said what's happened was a suspended ceiling had collapsed, which kind of goes into the story that you've told. And we're very fortunate that the only injury that's been suffered is Ruben Agbula's suffered some quite serious bruising. But apart from that, everybody's all right. I'll be having a meeting with the board next week, and we'll be releasing a full statement about it and all this sort of stuff. So those two stories kind of tie in together. But from the the immediate aftermath of it, we've been turned over in this very niggly game. We've gone and trashed the dressing room, and everything's not happy at Roker Park, and that's the way it was portrayed in the immediate aftermath of that game. But it's certainly one to dig into next. You've given me my on this day for next week now as well, haven't you?
There you go.
We will
save you a job.
Exactly.
The ceiling comes crashing in more ways than one, Martin. Yeah,
it certainly does. And yeah, as Andrew said, if all of those things are accurate, it could have been a hell of a lot worse.
Absolutely.
Very, very easily,
Yeah.
couldn't it? 1996, Sunderland played Southend away. We won 2-0. Martin Scott got a penalty, and Mickey Bridges, I think this is his first goal for us. This was a game that was fog bound, and if you can find any footage on TV, you won't see a great deal because it is very, very misty. I think from one end, the Sunderland supporters didn't know who'd scored or if we'd scored. In the other end, of course, for the game to go ahead, the referee's got to be able to see both goals from the halfway line, hasn't he? But that's got no consideration to the fans behind each of those goals. In 1999, on February 27th, this is a game that Chris loves talking about. The first ever pay-per-view televised game in England. Oxford 0, Sunderland 0. And I remember spending the £8 or whatever it was to watch that. Still haven't got my money back. February the 28th, 1903. This was the kind of the forerunner at the Charity Shield. So it was the Sheriff of London's Shield. And Sunderland went to White Hart Lane and beat Corinthians 3-0. Jimmy Miller got 2 and Joey Hewitt got the other goal. 1987, Mark Proctor got a penalty late on against Ipswich to give us a 1-0 win. And it was a bit interesting because Ipswich had a stand-in goalkeeper, a defender called Ian Cranston, who I think is a North East lad from memory. But he ended up being in goal, and Mark Proctor slotted the penalty past him. A couple of years later, there was some penalty controversy at Ewood Park. Sunderland had a 2-2 draw with Blackburn. Now, we got a penalty after 6 minutes. Marco scored to give us a 1-0 lead. Then in the 16th minute, Blackburn get a penalty. Howard Gale, former Sunderland player, now playing for Blackburn, steps up to take it. Tony Yom saves it. Marco then puts us 2-0 up in 27 minutes. Half time, it's 2-0 to us. A lad called Mark Atkins, who I think won the Premier League. He was in the Premier League winning side for Blackburn a few years later. He got a goal back to make it 2-1 to Sunderland on 61 minutes. Then Frank Gray puts through his own net on 72 to make it 2-2. Now, in the very last minute of injury time, we get another penalty. Marco steps up, but Terry Geno, who was a Blackburn Rovers goalkeeper, manages to save it, and that ends the game 2-2. So Marco started the game with a penalty being converted and ended the game with his penalty being saved. 1998, we mentioned Darren Williams coming on as a sub for Cardiff earlier. Darren Williams on the score sheet for Sunderland as we drew 2-2 with Ipswich. Kevin Phillips got our other goal, and Tony Mowbray was in the Ipswich team that day. And 2025, on February 28th, we beat Sheffield Wednesday 2-1. That was a game where Eliza Mayenda got 2 goals down at Hillsborough. February the 29th, 1908. This was a bit of an interesting one I found. A chap called Emerson Marples. I'm not sure if he was related to Miss, but he made his debut against Chelsea for Sunderland. Now, he's the only player to make his debut for Sunderland on February the 29th, which is just an interesting little quirk of fate as well. We got beat 2-1 on that day. Now, George Holly got our goal in 44, and that was a rebound from a penalty that was taken by a lad called Sam Raybould. Now, I hadn't heard of Sam Raybould to any great extent before, so I had a bit of a look at him, and he only played 28 times for us. He scored 12 goals, but he's a very, very famous Liverpool player. And that's where that little sort of thing at the back of my mind where I go, I've heard of him, but not in the Sunderland context, but Sunderland connection, he was signed by Tom Watson for Liverpool. He played 211 games for Liverpool, scored 120 goals, so hugely important figure in Liverpool's history. Came to Sunderland for a season, got almost 1 and 2, and then went to Arsenal. to finish his career off playing the season at Arsenal. Had a far more successful career than Emerson Marples, however. So Emerson Marples, it turns out, was a 30-year-old right-back who we signed from Chesterfield. He didn't play too many games. He only played 10 games for us. And he suffered a knee injury, I think, early the following season. That was pretty much the end of his pro career. He played some semi-pro or non-league football, but that was the end of his professional career. But it seems a quirky signing, I think, Emerson Marples, to bring him in from Chesterfield. So there you go.
Good detective work on that one, Martin.
Quite impressive, wasn't it? Quite impressive. 1992, Sunderland beat Wolverhampton Wanderers at Roker Park. John Byrne got a penalty in the first half to seal that one. Now, we are going to delve into the 1964 game against Manchester United in the FA Cup. We're going to take a short break before we do so, and we'll be back with that story very soon.
The world moves fast. Your workday, even faster. Pitching products, drafting reports, analyzing data. Microsoft 365 Copilot is your AI assistant for work. Built into Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and other Microsoft 365 apps you use. Helping you quickly write, analyze, create, and summarize. So you can cut through clutter and clear a path to your best work. Learn more at Microsoft.com/M365 Copilot.
TaxAct knows every small business owner has different tax filing needs. With TaxAct, you can file yourself with the help of an expert, or TaxAct can do it all for you. You're the boss, the head honcho, the top banana. And TaxAct is like your loyal, trusty tax aide, ready to pounce on any tax needs you might have. TaxAct is dying to pounce on some small business tax needs. TaxAct. Let's get them over with.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast, and as promised before the break, Kelvin's going to take us back to 1964 in a pretty memorable game at Old Trafford.
He will if he takes himself off mute, Martin.
It would help, wouldn't it?
Stop sticking my mute button on, will you two? Stop that. I have been looking forward to this, and this is one of those games when I say, I wish I'd seen this one. I was just 2 seasons away from my first game at Roker Park, so I wasn't that far away from the series of games. There was 3 games in all to get this FA Cup tie decided, and this was the first one. We'd beaten the league champions Everton in the 5th round 3-1 at Roker Park in front of 62,800 fans, with goals from Charlie Hurley, Jim McNabb, and an own goal. And remember that at this point, we are a 2nd division team still, albeit that we're right up there at the top of the league. And I think that game against Everton, these games against Man United, they're real indicators of how good that 63-64 team was. The potential in the team was to take on the best in the country at that time in the cup. It's a real barometer of your marker for where this team was and where it was going. Len Ashurst, he played in these games. He said, I was sort of looking at his autobiography, Left Back in Time, and Charlie Hurley's as well, to get their thoughts on this series of games, really. But he said a really funny thing about the draw, after the Everton game. He said, when the FA Cup draw was made, it was alleged that Sam Bolton, the Leeds chairman, used to put a black ball with his club's number on it into the freezer the night before to make sure it was pulled out as a home draw. Was this true? Between 1963 and 1968, Leeds came out at home in 12 out of the 16 FA Cup ties that they played in. So Ashurst was, if you haven't read Left Back in Time, there are some very, very pithy comments in there about things where he he does come at it from left field almost, you know. And then he goes on about Sid Collins, our chairman. Sid Collins, our chairman, was at FAHQ to make the 6th round draw after the Everton victory. He obviously didn't have a trick up his sleeve, as he drew out his own club, Sunderland, at cup holders Man United. So he wasn't forgiving them for, you know, at the time, Man United, they were the Busby Babes, they were X Factor, and they were pulling these huge crowds into Old Trafford, and it just they'd won the cup the season before. They were the cup holders. They'd won the cup the season before, and they really were at that point a brilliant team to go and watch and to go and see play. And they weren't that far away from the 1968 European Cup side, Cup winning side. You know, I'll tell you who they all had in their team, Man United. They had a goalkeeper called Dave Gaskell. So Alex Stepney wasn't there yet. Dave Gaskell was the goalkeeper. The fullbacks were Shea Brennan and Tony Dunn, who would be recognisable names to people that were around at the time and followed Man United's European adventures. The halfbacks, Pat Crerand, Big Bill Fulks was the captain, and Morris Setters, who we were actually talking about him the last time I was on this week. Morris Setters was one of the halfbacks. The front 5 for Man United: David Hurd, Nobby Stiles, Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law, and Georgie Best. Sort that front 5 out if you can. I tell you, what a front 5 that was. And David Hurd was a very underrated player for me. I saw him play a couple of times just as a young boy, and he was a fine player. But Nobby Stiles, Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law, and Georgie Best. Jeez, Betsy. You could see why people were excited about Man United. Our team on that day was the 63-64 team that people used to be able to, people of that generation could rhyme up. We had Monty in goals, Cease Irwin and Len Ashurst at fullback, Martin Harvey, Charlie Hurley, and a local youngster called Dave Elliott at halfbacks playing. Dave Elliott was only playing his second game for the club, and that must have been a hell of a thing. He was 19-year-old, only playing his second game. He was from Tantoby. He was a Tantoby youngster, and he played about 35 games for us, all told, between 64 and 66. And then he transferred to Newcastle for 10 grand. He was an interesting player. I actually saw him play in one of my earlier games at Roker Park. He wasn't a bad player at all, but what a game to come in for as a 19-year-old. Our front 5, we had Brian Usher, George Hurd, Nick Sharkey, Johnny Crossan, and Jody Mulhall as our front 5. So that was the team that, by and large, played that promotion campaign throughout the 63-64 season. And as I said, these games, they really showcased how good that 63-64 team was. There was 16,000 Sunderland fans made the trip to Old Trafford, and the crowd for the game was 61,700. And that's 16,000 Sunderland fans. I was interested in what you were saying before, Andrew, about the cup semi-final at Bramall Lane. You know, it's funny how things move on, isn't it? And the way that football in general starts grabbing everybody, and huge bodies of fans get on the move to go and watch football. So it wasn't the first time that Old Trafford had seen an invasion of Sunderland fans, for sure. 16,000 fans all making a right then. Charlie Hurley, he had some very funny things to say about this game, reading his autobiography. Bearing in mind that that's called the greatest centre-half the world has ever seen. He wasn't short of confidence, Charlie. But he told a funny story about the dressing room just before the game. He said, I asked who was going to stop Law best in Charlton. Alan Brown walked around the dressing room, stroking his chin, and giving it a bit of thought, and then said, I don't think you will be able to do it on your own, Charlie. He wasn't noted for his sense of humour, Alan Brown, but Hurley reckons that it sort of broke the ice for the young team, because they were a young team at that time. And he said, we went out and produced a swashbuckling display, having had the ice broken in the dressing room, unusually by Alan Brown with a little bit of humour. And he recalled as well going up to do the coin toss when the teams were out there and the whole crowd was assembled. And he said when he walked up into the centre circle, all he could hear echoing round Old Trafford was Charlie, Charlie. It must have been a really nice memory for him. The game itself, it kicks off. It's a ding-dong open game in the early stages, with Sunderland given as good as they were getting. Argus was there reporting for the Northern Daily Mail, and he waxed lyric about the game. He could be a bit savage, Argus, but he waxed lyric about the game. He makes special note of how much trouble Big Bill Fuchs had with Little Nick Sharkey. When you look, if you can ever be bothered to do this, have a look at what a big lad Bill Fuchs was, and then imagine 5'5" Nick Sharkey running underneath his legs and stuff like that, because he really did give him a lot of trouble in this game. How frustrated Dennis Law became as Hurley almost marked him out of the game. Now, Law was booked for lashing out, and Dennis Law also he smashed Jimmy Munty in the face going up for a cross, which affects the game right at the end of the game. But he cut a very frustrated figure for that game. Argus also spoke about Lenny Ashurst and how well he did against the superstar that was Georgie Best. And that is actually something that I've written about before, and certainly I've seen Sunderland play Man United as a young lad, and Lenny Ashurst always seemed to play well against George Best. I would say to you, in some games that I've seen at Roker Park, I've seen George Best go meandering onto the other wing to get away from Lenny Ashurst. So when Ashurst himself says that he played well against him, I would sort of echo that. And the other thing August mentions is how well the promise shown by Dave Elliott in this game. What a game to come in for at 19 years old. He'd only played his debut the week before in a 3-0 victory against Derby at Roker Park, and this is him playing his second game. For the record, in terms of goal scoring, we scored on 43 minutes when George Hurd broke from defence and fed Brian Usher into space down the right wing. He could fly a bit, Usher, and he sped forward and fired across to the back post. Gaskell came out for it, but missed it, and Geordie Mulhall was just coming in at the back post behind him, and he just catches it and angles it with his head almost across Gaskell and back in at the far post and off the post. So we're 1-0 up at half time, and there was 16,000 fans have given it loudy in Old Trafford. And all of a sudden, the 61,000 that are of that crowd that are Man United fans, they're not sort of laughing at their poor second division neighbours anymore, because they're being given a hell of a game by Sunderland. 49 minutes, Man United were caught on the break by Usher again, and he slides a pass to Johnny Crossan on the left wing, and he beat his marker, Shea Brennan, and weaved his way along the 18-yard line, and then spun and smashed the ball past Gaskell for goal number 2. Johnny Crossan, according to Charlie Hurley, this was Johnny Crossan's best ever game for Sunderland against Man United in this game. So he gets that goal and sets that 16,000 Sunderland fans really thinking that they're up for the cup and they're going to provide this another shock. On 55 minutes, David Hurd, the Man United winger, put a crossover, and we've spoken before about how Charlie Hurley had these lovely bits of football in him. You know, he would do a step over in his own box or a little back heel out to Cease Irwin to relieve pressure. He had these marvellous sort of moments. And one of the things he used to do, which wasn't that commonplace, if a cross came across, he would like backhead it to the goalkeeper. And it was just, he would do it without even looking. And it would look just such a smashing, sharp bit of play. So David Hurd's cross comes across. There isn't anybody particularly from Man United challenging for the cross. So Charlie decides he'll just backhead it to Monty, who, when he last looked, was standing on the line. But when he turned round to look, Monty was almost up his backside. And the ball just sailed into the net for a goal. And Hurley himself, he was, you know, if he had supreme confidence in his skill, he could also run himself down. He says in his book something like, you know, it always looked great when it came off like that, but I looked a right bloody idiot with the ball nestled in the back of the goal. So 2-1, but actually Sunderland scored all the goals. Undeterred, it didn't let we knock it, you know, according to all the press cuttings, we didn't let that goal knock we back, and we rode right back into the game. Another United attack broken up, and this time George Hurd set Johnny Crossan away down the left wing, and he was kind of he was an inside left Johnny Crossan, but him and George Mulhall would interchange on the left wing sometimes, and so Geordie Hurd sets Crossan away. He beats 3 defenders on a mazy run into the box, and Shea Brennan, who's the fullback on that side, who, according to Argus, had a hell of a he'd put a hell of a shift in with Mulhall and Crossan coming down his side, and not a lot of help coming his way, and almost in a fit of peak, he just upends Crossan in the box for one of your most obvious penalties. Crossan gets up and slams the penalty past Gaskell on the hour to put Sunderland 3-1 up. The 16,000 in the crowd are going bonkers. Hurley, he says at that point, he didn't see how Man United, given how they'd played and how Sunderland were playing, were going to get back into the game. But there was this incident, a ball came across, and Len Ashurst and Charlie Hurley in their respective autobiographies talk about this incident. So they both say roughly the same thing. Hurley, he says there was a cross came into the box. Jimmy Monty went to grab it, and Dennis Law sat away late and just whacked Monty in the face as he went to collect the ball, and Monty fell to the ground in a heap. And what Hurley says about it is a more streetwise keeper might have played this a little bit differently, given where we were at in the game. We're going into the last knock-ins of the game here. We're 3-1 up. He would, a more streetwise keeper at the time might have, as Charlie says, give it all the agonies and roll around and waste some time. But Monty was asked by the ref, "Are you all right?" And he allegedly said to the referee, "Not really." And the ref says, "Can you get up?" And Monty says, "Not really. Charlie's standing on me arm." So Hurley's sort of standing there trying to say to him in front of the referee, "Just bloody lie there, man. Can you not waste a bit of time here?" But Monty being Monty, and he's still a comparatively speaking a young lad, he's like, no, I want to get up. I want to play. I don't want to let the lads down. There was no subs. So he would know that he would, he'd need to carry on. Hurley reflects on that. He said, if I'd been able to, I would have had him stay down for another 2 or 3 minutes because he wasn't ready to resume. And they scored 2 goals in like 2 minutes, right at the end of the game, to claw back that 3-1 scoreline. Ashurst, he corroborates that it came from Hurley. And he said he heard when Monty was sort of getting treatment, he didn't actually get any treatment. The trainer ran on and flung a sponge in his face. And by that point, he jumped up and was saying he was ready to go. But in the process, Ashurst heard Johnny Crossan ask the referee how long was left. And the ref replied, "It's all over, Johnny. There's only 7 minutes to go." How wrong he was. How wrong he was. Bobby Charlton scored with a rare header from a corner as a dazed Monty could only stand there watching on 86 minutes. And Ashurst, he went on, he said, Monty was whacked heavily on the head and concussed, but because these were the days before subs, he just had to carry on. Now, Ashurst, he's got a really vivid recollection of Georgie Best's goal that he scores on 87 minutes. He says, "I'd always prided myself on doing well against Best over the years, and that day was no exception. I had a damn good game. But he, meaning Best, showed his genius with one moment of magic. Normally heavily right-footed, on this occasion Best cut inside and hit a left-foot shot which went through a sea of legs in the muddy Old Trafford penalty area and beat the still-dazed Monty for the equaliser on 87 minutes. 2 goals in 2 minutes. It was gutting, is Ashurst's view of that. Now, Man United had gotten out of jail. The replay would be at Roker 4 days later, and I mean that's another story. Argus reports the next day, "I would like to go on record that the famous Roker Row will need to pull out something special if it is to be classed with the wonderful work of the 16,000 gathered at Old Trafford on Saturday. They were terrific. And the day finished with the team and their supporters proud of each other." Now that's what Argus had to say about the whole thing. Bobby Charlton, these 3 ties, but this game included, he refers to these 3 ties as one of his greatest football memories. When you think about everything that Bobby Charlton did, there you've got Sunderland right in the mix again there. Martin O'Neill, who he followed these games as a story that he was at boarding school and followed these games on his radio. He was underneath the blankets, and although he got caned for listening to it past lights out, he became a Sunderland fan. So enraptured was he by this whole this whole series of games. It just sounded just such a fantastic FA Cup tie, this one. Two teams having a right good go at each other. And that Man United team, I mean, so full of superstars, really. And they're just going toe-to-toe with them and giving them the fright of your life. I'm tempted to say tune in next week for more. as we deep dive a dramatic replay at Roker Park. And it really was dramatic and tragic as well. But that is, as they say, another story. Just sounded like a fantastic game that I would have loved to have been at it.
No, it certainly doesn't. There's plenty more to come in that story, as you've alluded to, next week, isn't it? And for anybody who can see the pod artwork for this episode, that is a picture of the penalty being taken by Johnny Crossan. So we've dug that photo out of the archives, and that is an actual photo from that game in 1964. We will very quickly move on to March the 1st before we wrap up this week's episode. As I said, it's an extra long episode this week because we've got the leap year to contend with, and Kelvin's marriage proposals, of course. So March the 1st, 1930, we beat Sheffield United 3-0 at Roker Park. Billy Clunas, Bobby Gurney and Adam McLean got the goals. 1969, we beat Stoke City 4-1. That game was also at Roker Park. Colin Suggett, Calvin Palmer, Dennis Stewart and Malcolm Moore got the goals. Colin Beasley made his debut. Interestingly, Gordon Banks got injured for Stoke on 11 minutes, but Stoke didn't actually take him off until 17, or the sub didn't come on until 17 minutes. So whether they were trying to patch him up or not, I suspect they were trying to see if he could actually get back onto the field, but he did not get back onto the field, and Stoke made a sub. Tony Allen came on for them on 17. 1986, Andy Dibble made his debut for Sunderland in the game against Huddersfield at Leeds Road. We lost that one 2-0. Terry Curran, who of course plays for Sunderland, got 2 goals for Huddersfield in that day, and Mick Buxton was the Huddersfield manager. 1988, we beat Fulham 2-0 at Roker Park. Gordon Armstrong and Marco Gabbiadini with the goals. Clive Walker was in the Fulham team that day. And 2018, Sunderland played Crystal Palace at the Stadium of Light. That game ended 2-2. Dame Ndoye got his only goal for us on that occasion. Fabio Barini got an equaliser for us, and Connor Wickham got 2 goals for Crystal Palace in between Sunderland's 2 goals. So we mentioned Connor Wickham scoring for MK Dons earlier in the podcast. That was some goals he scored against Sunderland for Crystal Palace on that occasion. But that kind of wraps it up for this week's episode, chaps. And Andrew, do you have something for the listeners to ponder on over the coming days?
I do. I mean, most of our listeners will always be pondering on Sunderland anyway. I think that's just an occupational hazard of being a Sunderland fan. You can be in the middle of conversation about something else with your better half or meant to be working, and then suddenly Sunderland crops up in your mind. Or it does for me, at least. Maybe the rest of you have other things going on in your lives. I have to admit, I've got my dates mixed up, and I thought we'd cover the 1st of March next time. I've been kind of bamboozled by the extra day in February, and yeah, whether we get a 29th of Feb or not. So my question does actually focus on the 1st of March, but I think we can talk about this anyway, because it was a story that, whilst announced on the 1st of March 1999, continued into subsequent months. And the reason it popped out to me now and it felt quite apt is because, again, in 2026, we're talking about it again. We're talking about Stadium of Light expansion. So in 1999, the club formally announced plans and submitted official planning to request the capacity was increased from 42,000 to around 48,000. They were going to do so by extending which stand. Now that sounds fairly basic, but I would like, please, the sponsored name that the stand was known
Oh, there you go.
as at the time, not what we might refer to it in its more generic term. Its official sponsored name from 1999, please.
Very good. I've got a couple of candidates milling around my mind, but we'll save them for next week.
Yes, well, like I say, milling around your mind already, and who knows, you're driving to work or you're meant to be dropping the kids off somewhere, and then suddenly it'll pop up in your head and you'll be like, aha, there we go. Sunderland have crept into my mind again.
Very good. It happens with unerring regularity, doesn't it? We will say thank you very much, Andrew. Always a pleasure, mate.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for reminding me of the Huddersfield away trip back in the late 90s. I was visiting family at the time in Bradford. It must have been half term, and I went to the game with a relative. So that's the Sunderland memory that's going to be running through my mind the next couple of days. An enjoyable trip to, I don't know if it was the McAlpine or the John Smiths back then or what, but good fun as always, and nice remembering the old games that I've been to.
Certainly is, and thank you very much, Kelvin.
Thanks very much. Hey, lads, here's something to ponder. How many games and trophies would we won if we didn't have nets?
Oh, it's funny. When Andrew was talking about that, I was thinking, well, there was that goal at Watford that Stuart Atwell gave a few years ago, wasn't it? That didn't go in, but he said did go in, or vice versa. And the nets didn't seem to affect his judgment that day, or help his judgment anyway.
That was the ghost goal, wasn't it? I'm sure it was described as a ghost goal. Aye.
Yeah.
Happy
there we go.
days.
It's not it's not foolproof, but it obviously is an awful lot better than what that used to piss me off when he played school games when he didn't have nets. Never mind playing professional games.
Yeah, it's just so open to abuse, isn't it? And complaints. It's asking for teams to fall out. So but yeah, it's often the most simple solutions are the ones that take longest to come up with.
Martin, would the Black Hill Bruiser double his school goal tally if?
I'm going to claim a few. I always claimed them whether they were legit or not. But I was never shy to claim a goal.
Good
I would have
stuff.
had a few more in my tally, I think. Thank you very much to everyone for listening. Thank you to Andrew. Thank you to Kelvin. We'll be back tomorrow with another episode of Haway The Podcast. And of course, back next week with another episode of On This Week. But until then, it's goodbye from us.